This is the Thoughtful Travel Podcast. I'm your host, Amanda Kendall of the notaballerina.com travel blog. Every episode I'll share travel tales from several fellow travel lovers, and together we hope to entertain and inspire you, remind you of some of your own great travel experiences, and encourage you to hit the road again soon. Hello and welcome to episode 175 of the Thoughtful Travel Podcast. Today's topic is walking and hiking travels. Now, you may know, if you're a regular listener, that I am not an adventurous kind of traveller. I am not going to be, doing full-on mountaineering, definitely no bungee jumping or anything like that. But I really feel like walking and hiking is something I will do more of in the future. I haven't had much experience doing it, but I feel like that is my kind of physical adventure travel. Nothing too, I don't want to, start abseiling or anything as part of my crazy hiking trails or anything, but I love to walk. When I'm, traveling in a city, I can just walk all day. I love that pace of life and, being able to see things pass by and to feel like you've got somewhere on, using just your own 2 feet. That's a great way to go. So today I have 3 wonderful guests who have all done some pretty serious walking of various kinds. And their stories are, they're a good variety of the different kinds of ways that walking and hiking when you travel can be both fascinating and challenging. And I think you'll enjoy it because I certainly enjoyed chatting to them. So my first guest is Laura Waters. And in fact, I have just finished reading her book, Bewildered, which is about this hike that she's going to tell us more about from the top to the bottom of New Zealand. And I'll mention it again in the show notes, but her book, Bewildered, is magical, fabulous book. You might remember Laura from a couple of weeks ago speaking about anxiety and travel. And between that topic of anxiety and this topic of hiking, if you enjoy hearing those things, you'll enjoy reading her book for sure. In fact, I have to check the availability worldwide, but I may make it one of our Thoughtful Travellers Book Club books for later in the year. So anyway, watch this space. For now, I asked Laura to tell us something about this very long hike she took from the top to the bottom of New Zealand.
I'd always had in the back of my mind that I wanted to do a big adventure, a big physical challenge, and just see what I was capable of. I sort of felt that there'd be more to life than what I was doing, every day with work and what have you. And so when I just saw in a hiking magazine that this new trail had opened, a new hiking trail from one end of New Zealand to the other, I immediately thought that's the challenge for me. So it was a 3,000 kilometre route that I did from the very top of the North Island in New Zealand all the way to the bottom of the South Island. So it took me 5 months to cover 3,000 Ks, and that's pretty much walking roughly 8 hours a day for 6 days a week. And it's not easy hiking in New Zealand. It's not like Aussie hiking.
It goes up and down.
Oh, it does. Like the trail notes say, they call it undulating, but that just means going straight up over a hill, straight back down the other side, and then straight back up again. It's pretty crazy, and a lot of river crossings as well. So, unbridged river crossings. So you've got those challenges to deal with. Sometimes there's no defined ground trail to follow as well. So you're just kind of following the contours of the land. Just going through the saddle of a mountain range or following a river for a couple of hours, maybe walking in it for a couple of hours.
Wow.
So it was quite unformed at times, and then easier in other sections. But it was definitely the biggest physical challenge I've ever done, and I lost a lot of weight and got to eat a lot of chocolate doing it. I think I calculated I was eating about half a kilo of chocolate a week.
Wow. And yet losing weight. That is like my dream outcome.
I know, isn't it? Half a kilo of nuts a week, half a kilo of cheese a week. I just couldn't eat enough to counterbalance the amount of exercise that I was doing.
Oh, I'm not surprised at all. Had you done much physical adventure before this?
Well, I'd done some, I'd done overnight hikes, but the longest I'd done was the overland track in Tasmania, which was 65 kilometres, and took me about 6 days. So in my first 4 days on the New Zealand trail, which is Te Araroa, I did 100 kilometres in in 4.5 days. So I sort of, very quickly blew my previous record out of the water. Yeah, but I think, like I did some training. I worked with a physio for 8 months beforehand to sort of get my body in balance and activate muscles that I didn't know I had in my glutes and my abs, things like that. And then I walked for a couple of hours a day using my daily commute to work. I did that for the 3 months beforehand. And then really you just get most of your fitness actually on the trail. Once you've got your base level of fitness and you've got your body in tune and it's balanced, you just get stronger out on the trail. That's what I found. Yeah.
How physically tiring and exhausting is it? Did you feel shattered at the end of each day?
I did. For the first 3 weeks, everything hurt. It didn't matter, excuse me, if I was lying down or resting or what I was doing, every muscle hurt. But eventually I got used to that. But then there'd be like really long days where you're just, walking for maybe 10 hours a day and walking quite fast and not having a lot of breaks, just because sometimes the weather or the conditions demand that you just got to push on and get off a mountain range or something. So some of those days were really long and tiring. But I tell you, it's amazing what happens, what a good night's sleep can do. Even in a tent, you're just so exhausted, you fall asleep, and then you wake up in the morning and it's like the slate has been wiped clean.
Wow.
And you sort of spring out and have another go at it. So, and I guess in a sick kind of way, I kind of like that.
The torture of it.
Yeah, I do. Or the challenge of it. When you lie down in bed at night and your body's aching and you feel like, well, I've earned this. I've earned this rest. I've used my body how it's supposed to be used. I've not been sitting at a desk getting a sore back or anything. I've been pumping my lungs with oxygen and using my muscles, and that feels good, when you lay down at the end of the day and you sort of think, that was a good day and I've had a good exercise.
I've really earned this rest and I've earned my chocolate and cheese.
Exactly, yes. Do a couple of lines of chocolate.
Oh, that does actually sound awesome. I know on the rare occasions that I get to bed and feel like I've had one of those days, it is a lovely feeling. So I imagine 5 months of it is pretty awesome. What did you do on the 7th day, on the days off? Did you just stay in a camp and chill out? What did you do?
Well, the trail goes through or near a town roughly once a week on average. So I would get to town. I would, spend a couple of nights. So I'd have 2 nights and 1 day in a town, and that would let me do my washing, resupply with food, write some emails and just catch up on stuff. So it was a little bit of relaxation, but it was
life admin as well. Yeah.
Bit of chores as well, and reading the notes for the week ahead and, seeing what I had to deal with coming up and where I was maybe going to camp for the night, just get a rough plan of the week ahead. Yeah. So it was quite logistically busy, I suppose, in that sense. And then on the other hand, also the most, one of the most freeing experiences I've ever had, because all I had to do was walk, find my way, find some shelter and water, and that's all I needed to do. I didn't have all of the multitasking challenges that we have in modern life in society. So
that sounds absolutely lovely.
It was blissful.
So did you all hear that sentence? Laura said she would eat 0.5 kilo of chocolate per week, but she was losing weight. That sounds like amazing. Just what I want. My perfect combination of life. No, partially, just kidding. Partially. But, what an amazing effort. 5 months of hiking, and 3,000 kilometers. That is a really big walk. And I know, having read Laura's book, that it's, it's not just the physical, it's also the emotional part of it, which is utterly, utterly fascinating. And what a beautiful place to do it. Now, my next guest today is Suzanne Moore. And in fact, Suzy's also recorded a story with me about a more demanding hike that she took, a multi-day hike down in southwest of Western Australia. But that'll be coming up in another episode. Suzy also is the happy owner of a small house in Japan, in Hokkaido. Until I met Suzy, I didn't know that this was a thing, but it's quite an enclave of Australians and other foreigners who own these small houses in relatively abandoned Japanese villages. So it's not super expensive or anything. And although they usually use it to go skiing and so on, Suzy told me this lovely story about one day when she and her husband decided to climb Mt Yote, which is right near where their house is in Japan.
It was about 4 years ago now. We were up at our house in Japan, and we had decided that we were going to climb to the top of Mt Yote. So it's a 2,000 meter high volcano, and it's about a 5-hour walk up and a sort of 3 to 4 hour walk down, and there's about an hour around the crater at the top.
Okay.
And it's sort of a pilgrimage the local Japanese people do. Most people seem to do it every year as a once a year, we go, we pay our respects to Mt Yote kind of thing.
Okay.
And so I was lucky that my father was up staying with us, and he had offered to watch the kids. And my husband and I decided, right, we're going to do this. We're going to hike up during the day, sleep in the hut. There's a hut up the top, sleep in the hut overnight.
Cool.
And then get to the peak for sunrise and have our breakfast on the top, watch the sunrise come up over Hokkaido, and then walk down. Oh. And, we were like, we're in our late 30s, and we're like, yeah, we're fit, we're strong, we're going to do this. We're so hardcore. We were beefing each other up. And I bought all this.
This sounds ominous.
Well, I bought all this equipment. I got new camping mattresses and sleeping bags, and I bought an amazing new hiking backpack where I could access my camera without having to take my bag off. And, we were gunning, and we had dehydrated food and a camping stove, and, we were pro.
For one night.
For one night, and our walking poles, and, we were on it. And
oh, dear.
I carried like 10 kilos of camera equipment.
Oh,
and
gosh.
There's no water on the mountain, so you had to carry 2 days worth of water, and it was pretty warm. It was September. We ditched the kids, and off we went, and we were so excited. And, after a couple of hours into it, I'm like, good Lord, this is very, very steep, and I'm very unfit. And, I was sort of lagging, and we did it, and it was incredible. And, we got to the top, and we had breakfast at the peak, and it was the best tasting coffee I've ever had in my entire life. And, the view was spectacular, and I got to see my own shadow surrounded by a halo of a rainbow cast across the landscape, the way the sun and the mountain interacted. And
wow.
All these just, again, life-changing experiences. But I think the thing that really got me was, we had put so much work into this trip, and we were shattered. I could barely walk by the time I got to the bottom. I couldn't walk in a straight line anymore. And then I remembered on the way, when we'd started the walk on the way up, these old women, Japanese women in their 70s or 80s, tootling down the trail, having done their walk to the top without any of this rubbish that we had been carrying. And we just must have looked like such newbies.
Yes. And such foreigners.
Such foreigners. And I'm sure they went home and all had a really good laugh at us. But nonetheless, it was worth it anyway. And we're going to do it again in September this year.
I was just going to say, do you plan to do it again? Right.
Yes. And we're going to take the kids up this time.
Oh, brilliant. And a bit less stuff.
And a bit less stuff, yes. We won't stay overnight this time.
Right. Oh, wow.
But I'd read a blog about it in my prep. I was reading everything, and I'd read a blog post, and this Australian guy had done it, and he said, I went up and I was so proud of myself. I gunned it up the mountain, and I got to the top, and there was a local Japanese guy in shorts and thongs smoking a cigarette with his dog.
Oh, no, with his dog even.
With his dog. Whereas we're like ready, kitted up for Everest.
Yeah, that's right. Oh, my goodness me. Oh, that's fabulous. I love that story. How hilarious. I I have to say, I climbed Mount Fuji when I was in Japan, and there were plenty of those much older than me Japanese people who were scooting on past me. So, yeah.
It's remarkable.
It's remarkable, yes. And embarrassing.
Very embarrassing, especially when you're carrying, your life on your back.
Yeah, absolutely. I can't wait to hear how Suzy's family climb of Mt Yote works out. And at least they've learnt a lot from the first one. And I absolutely had similar experiences on Fuji. And I always remember actually getting to the top or near the top ready for sunrise. That's the moment when everyone, is ready to look, stand and watch the sunrise. And I was utterly shattered because I was really not fit and prepared for the climb. And these, Japanese people at the time probably triple my age were just sailing past me without a care in the world. So, yeah, I get it. Anyway, moving on to our final guest today, and he is Rick Antonson. Now, Rick has written a book about this experience, which I'll mention in the show notes as well. And his experience was walking the Kokoda Track in Papua New Guinea. And when he agreed to do it, he didn't really quite know what he was letting himself in for.
My wife was general manager with the Cairns Airport, and we moved to Palm Cove, just a little north of the airport. And the first night overcame two neighbors, and we're still in contact with them, even though we no longer live there. Wonderful people. Glenn, whose nickname was Monk, and he becomes Monk in the book, and Wens. And sort of, being Australian, they showed up with beer and pictures of other stuff and said, we won't stay long. And of course, all of a sudden it's midnight. And I will admit, and I'm somewhat embarrassed to say this, I did not know the name Kokoda Track. And so when Monk said to me, I'm going to do Kokoda, do you want to come? I right away, perhaps emboldened by liquid courage at this point, said, absolutely. And we shook hands, and I said, there's just one thing I'm not clear about. What's the Kokoda? And he said, playing to my naivete, it's a walk across the country. And I said, well, great. Which country? And he said, Papua New Guinea. And I was committed at this point and learned so much in the rest of the time as I prepared for the trip. The training that the company we went with put us through was significant. They sent us a lot of their expectations, which was that in the 3 months before you go, you're active 3 times a week, up, down, finding hills to climb, whether you're in Melbourne or you're in Perth or you're where we were, which had lots of mountains and jungle. But get ready, because you're going to go on something that is extremely demanding. And the journey on Kokoda is 5 to 8 days, can be longer if the weather goes sour and you have rain and you slip and can't get grips. But it was a remarkable experience. In short, we went from landing in Port Moresby and getting out to the beginning of the trail, then sort of a 100 kilometer jaunt, about 60 miles, which is the Kokoda Trail, the Kokoda Track. It is called both proper. We then went further to the northern beaches and spent a few days there. These were all situational during 1942, basically June to the end of that year, early into 1943, when the Japanese and the Australians were in what General MacArthur called the worst fighting conditions anywhere in World War II.
Yeah. I've seen lots of documentaries and stuff about it because obviously it's an important part of our history. But it looks like, and it certainly has always sounded to me like it's really hard work to walk through there. It
is physically demanding, but it's emotionally demanding. I was with Australian mates, and one does need to be with an organized guide. One benefits from having Papouan porters who also help with meal preparation, camp setup, and all of that, because you are drained after up, down, down, up, down, all day. This is the land of false peaks that you think, oh, there's the top of the mountain. And you get there and see that the trail continues to go up to another peak and then to another, where you see a village in the distance and thinking, oh, we're going to get a rest spot there in an hour. And it's 4 hours away, but you've seen it on the sort of the distant horizon where it looks much closer. So yes, it is demanding, but that's the physical side. It is also it requires a lot on the emotional level, on the mental level, and part of that is because one is trekking through history. And the title "Walking with Ghosts" in Papua New Guinea comes because of, in part, the ghosts from the battles, whether those were Japanese or Australian or on the northern beaches, American or Papuan ghosts, the sort of that hanging around. Part of it also is the ghosts of the culture. This was a culture that at one point was headhunting and cannibalism that often gets sensationalized. And I write in the book about having the challenge not to sensationalize some of those cultural attributes. But there was a commonality to those and a purposefulness. They had a meaningfulness as practices at one point.
Yes.
No longer,
yeah.
but they inform your journey. I will say that on 2 occasions, there were a number where we would stop and have a bit of a service, a bit of a, let's just very much be in our moment to remember what happened here. And one at Brigade Hill, where I found I was crying, and the tears, and I've got good peripheral vision, and I looked around, and I was not the only, and I'm with a bunch of hardy Aussies.
It really makes for a kind of a life-changing, very impression-heavy trip when it's both physically and emotionally demanding, I think. I think Rick's experience on the Kokoda definitely ticks both of those boxes. So that is the end of my episode about walking and hiking on your travels. There's a real array of experiences there to already get some ideas and inspiration from, or just to think about, how you'll feel if you do such a hike or a walk when you travel. If you're curious about this topic and you haven't listened back, I have another episode about hiking on your travels back in episode 124. So do listen back if you're curious. A huge thank you to my wonderful guests. First off, I chatted with Laura Waters. You can find her website at soultrekkers.com.au, and her new book is Bewildered, in which she talks about this New Zealand hike. I'll leave a link in the show notes. I next chatted with the lovely Suzanne Moore, and you can find Suzanne's website. Sorry, I know her in person. I always call her Suzy. It sounds weird to say Suzanne, but it's important because it's in her website name, and it is SuzanneMooreWriter.com. Suzy actually also has a book coming out, her first novel coming out by the time this comes out, I think it'll be about 3 weeks away. It's on the 16th of March. And although it doesn't feature travel, it actually features time travel. So there you go. It's called The Place Between by Suzanne Moore, coming out soon. And last, but very far from least, the lovely Rick Antonson. And you can find Rick's website. He's published a lot of really cool travel-related books at rickantonson.com. And the book that I mentioned I'd read recently and is connected to the story he told today is called Walking with Ghosts in Papua New Guinea. And I'll leave a link in the show notes to that. Come along and join our Facebook group for Thoughtful Travellers if you haven't already. A link in the show notes, or just search for Thoughtful Travellers on Facebook. My goal at the moment is to hit 1,000 wonderful members. We're at 850, 60, something like that. Getting close. And all of this info and more is in today's show notes, and they are at notaballerina.com/175. As always, thank you very much for listening. This has been another episode of the Thoughtful Travel Podcast. Show notes and other information are at notaballerina.com/podcast. Join me again soon for another chat about why we travel. Bye for now.